At 81, Eric Clapton seems to have it all. 3 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductions, over 100 million records sold, custom Ferrari, and some of the world's most valuable paintings. But behind that success lies a haunting truth. As his fortune grew, so did the number of loved ones he lost. Addiction, obsessive love, a broken family, and the devastating death of his 4-year-old son shaped his life. How could one of the world's richest musicians endure so much heartbreak? First of all, we have to go back to where Eric Clapton's story first began. By the late 1960s, Eric Clapton had already accomplished what most musicians spend an entire lifetime chasing. Cream had become one of the biggest rock bands in the world. Fans painted the words, "Clapton is God," across walls in London. From the outside, it looked as though everything in his life was falling perfectly into place. In reality, the exact opposite was happening. At just 23 years old, he became deeply addicted to heroin alongside Alice Ormsby Gore, the daughter of David Ormsby Gore, the British ambassador to the United States, and a member of one of Britain's most prominent aristocratic families. What initially seemed like experimentation soon became a dependency that consumed almost every part of his life. For nearly 5 years, Clapton all but disappeared from public view. He rarely performed, isolated himself from friends, and reportedly spent thousands of pounds every week simply feeding his addiction. The man who had once electrified packed arenas was now spending most of his days behind closed doors, disconnected from the music that had made him famous. Years later, after finally overcoming both drugs and alcohol, Clapton looked back on that period with remarkable honesty. Instead of celebrating his success or his wealth, he spoke about something much simpler. "Because I was recovering from alcoholism and drug addiction, I regarded just being alive as a magnificent achievement. By all rights, I should have been dead a long time ago." Eventually, heroin loosened its grip. By the early 1970s, Clapton was slowly rebuilding both his health and his career. But if there was one lesson his life would repeat again and again, it was that overcoming one obsession often made room for another. This time, that obsession had a name: Pattie Boyd. There was just one problem. Pattie wasn't available. She was married to George Harrison of the Beatles, and Harrison wasn't just another rock star. He was one of Clapton's closest friends. The three spent a surprising amount of time together. Clapton frequently visited George and Pattie's home, played music with Harrison, and became part of their social circle. Somewhere along the way, admiration quietly turned into something much deeper. The more time Clapton spent around Pattie, the more impossible it became for him to hide his feelings. Clapton later admitted that he became completely consumed by Pattie. Friends noticed it. George Harrison knew it. Even Pattie herself realized that the guitarist who visited their home so often had fallen hopelessly in love with her. But knowing it changed nothing. She remained George's wife. Unable to move on, Clapton poured everything he couldn't say into music. During this period, he wrote Leila, a song inspired by the ancient Persian love story of a man driven nearly insane by his desire for a woman he could never have. It wasn't just a clever literary reference. It was a reflection of his own emotional state. His desperation eventually reached a point where writing songs was no longer enough. He wrote Pattie a letter. It wasn't simply a declaration of love. It read more like someone pleading to be released from an emotional prison. "If you want me, take me. I'm yours. If you don't want me, please break the spell that binds me." Looking back today, it's difficult to imagine a more complicated situation. Clapton was deeply in love with his best friend's wife. George Harrison knew. Pattie knew. And yet life continued as though everyone was waiting for something to change. Surprisingly, Harrison never responded with the kind of public anger many people might expect. The friendship between the two musicians survived, even as the situation became increasingly uncomfortable. Years later, Harrison would even joke about it publicly, revealing just how unusual their relationship had always been. For Clapton, however, there was nothing funny about it. Every passing year seemed to make his feelings stronger. Then, after years of emotional turmoil, the impossible finally happened. In 1977, Pattie Boyd divorced George Harrison. 2 years later, on March 27, 1979, she married Eric Clapton. By the early 1980s, alcohol had become his new addiction. Friends and colleagues later recalled that drinking increasingly shaped his daily routine, and Pattie Boyd found herself living with a man whose moods could change dramatically from one day to the next. The same determination that had made Clapton a musical genius often became destructive in his private life. Years later, Pattie summed up that pattern with a single observation. He would cling to something ferociously, then let it go and move on to the next obsession. That wasn't simply her explanation for why their marriage failed. It described the cycle that had followed Clapton for most of his adult life. First heroin, then Pattie. Now, alcohol. Unfortunately, the drinking wasn't the only problem. During their marriage, Clapton began several relationships outside of it. The most significant started in 1984 with Yvonne Kelly, a recording studio manager who was also married at the time. Their relationship remained hidden from the public, and in January 1985, Kelly gave birth to a daughter, Ruth. Very few people knew the child existed. Clapton himself kept the relationship largely secret, partly because both families were still intact. Only a year later, history repeated itself. While still married to Pattie, Clapton became involved with Italian actress and television personality Lori Del Santo. On August 21, 1986, she gave birth to a son, Connor. The situation was particularly heartbreaking for Pattie Boyd. Throughout their marriage, she desperately wanted children with Clapton. She later spoke openly about suffering multiple miscarriages and the emotional pain of realizing she might never become a mother. While she struggled with that loss, her husband had fathered 2 children with 2 different women. It became impossible for the marriage to survive. In 1989, after 10 years together, Pattie filed for divorce. The relationship that had inspired Leila ended not with romance but with betrayal, addiction, and years of accumulated disappointment. Ironically, it was only after losing his marriage that Clapton began to embrace fatherhood. Although he had not lived with Connor, the little boy gradually became the center of his world. Friends noticed a visible change in Clapton whenever his son was around. He scheduled his life differently, tried harder to remain sober, and began making plans that revolved around spending time together. For perhaps the first time in decades, Clapton seemed to be looking toward the future instead of running from the past. Many people close to him believed Connor had given him something that fame, money, and even love never could. A reason to become a different man. It seemed as though Eric Clapton had finally found the stability that had escaped him for so many years. But fate had one final tragedy waiting. On the morning of March 20th, 1991, 4-year-old Connor was staying with his mother in a Manhattan apartment on the 53rd floor. A housekeeper had just finished cleaning when an open window, left unguarded for only a brief moment, became the scene of an unimaginable accident. Connor fell to his death just hours before Clapton was due to pick him up for a day they had planned to spend together. In a single instant, the addictions, failed marriages, and scandals that had dominated Eric Clapton's private life no longer seemed like the greatest tragedies he would ever endure. The loss of his son would redefine the rest of his life, and eventually give birth to one of the most heartbreaking songs ever written. In 1992, he transformed his grief into Tears in Heaven, a deeply personal tribute to Connor that resonated with millions around the world. The song went on to win 3 Grammy Awards, including Record of the Year and Song of the Year, proving that unimaginable pain could still produce extraordinary beauty. Yet Clapton's healing did not end with music. Determined to help others escape the addictions that had once nearly claimed his own life, he later founded the Crossroads Center on the Caribbean island of Antigua, a rehabilitation facility dedicated to giving people trapped by alcohol and drugs the second chance he believed everyone deserved. But helping strangers rebuild their lives was only one part of his redemption. For years, Eric Clapton had searched for happiness through fame, success, and relationships, only to watch each of them slip away. This time, however, he stopped searching. Instead, he began building a life that was quieter, more stable, and far removed from the chaos that had defined his past. That new chapter began in 1998 when he met Leila during a Giorgio Armani event in Columbus, Ohio. Despite their 31-year age difference, the relationship grew slowly and away from public attention. Unlike so many of Clapton's earlier romances, this one wasn't built on obsession or headlines. It was built on patience. The couple married on New Year's Day in 2002 and went on to welcome 3 daughters, Julie Rose, Ella May, and Sophie Bell. Friends have often described these years as the happiest and most peaceful of Clapton's life. The devastating loss of Connor forever changed the way he viewed fatherhood, reminding him how precious every moment could be. Rather than allowing grief to define the rest of his life, he chose to become fully present for the family he still had. That transformation was reflected not only in the way Eric Clapton lived, but also in the fortune he quietly built over more than 6 decades. Today, his net worth is estimated at around $450 million, making him one of the wealthiest musicians in British history. Unlike many rock stars, Clapton accumulated his wealth patiently through music, smart investments, and assets that appreciated dramatically over time. The foundation of that fortune has always been his music. Across his solo career and his work with bands including Cream, Blind Faith, Derek and the Dominoes, and the Yardbirds, Clapton has sold well over 100 million records worldwide. Those sales generated enormous income during the vinyl, cassette, CD, and digital eras, but the real financial engine has been the royalties. Songs such as Leila, Wonderful Tonight, Cocaine, Tears in Heaven, Change the World, and I Shot the Sheriff continue to be streamed, purchased, licensed for films and television, and performed around the world decades after they were first released. Every new generation that discovers Eric Clapton's music keeps that royalty stream alive, creating a remarkably stable source of income that few artists ever achieve. Yet one of the smartest financial decisions of his life had nothing to do with guitars. In 2001, Clapton purchased 3 paintings by celebrated German artist Gerhard Richter for approximately $3.4 million. At the time, Richter was already respected within the art world, but few people imagined how dramatically his market would grow over the following decade. Clapton recognized that potential early. His patience paid off spectacularly. In 2011, one of those paintings sold for more than $20 million. Then, in 2012, another Richter painting from the same group, Abstractus Bild 809-4, sold at auction for $34.2 million, setting a record for a living artist at the time. Altogether, the 3 paintings generated more than $70 million, transforming a relatively modest art investment into one of the most successful private art trades ever made by a musician. It demonstrated that Clapton was not simply collecting expensive artwork because he could afford it. He understood value, scarcity, and long-term appreciation in much the same way experienced investors do. Ironically, some of Clapton's most valuable possessions never remained in his own collection. Throughout his career, guitars became almost inseparable from his identity. Instruments like Blackie, Brownie, and numerous vintage Fender and Gibson models helped define the sound of modern rock music. Most collectors would have kept them locked away forever. Clapton chose a different path. Beginning in 1999, he organized a series of famous charity guitar auctions to raise money for the Crossroads Center in Antigua. The most famous sale came in 2004 when Blackie, the composite Fender Stratocaster that had accompanied him through some of his greatest years, sold for nearly $960,000, becoming the world's most expensive guitar at the time. Over multiple auctions, Clapton raised tens of millions of dollars by parting with instruments that many musicians would consider priceless. It was perhaps the clearest example of how his priorities had changed. The guitars that built his career ultimately became tools to help save other people's lives. His wealth is equally visible in the places he calls home. Rather than centering his life around one extravagant mansion, Clapton has assembled a collection of luxury properties across several countries. His English homes provide the privacy of the countryside, allowing him to escape the constant attention that comes with being a rock legend. In the United States, he has owned high-end real estate that gives him easy access to recording projects and business commitments. Meanwhile, Antigua has become something far more personal than a vacation destination. In addition to housing the Crossroads Center, the Caribbean island serves as one of Clapton's favorite retreats, offering the peace and anonymity that have become increasingly important to him later in life. His taste for luxury also extends to automobiles, although even here, music remains part of the story. Among the highlights of his collection is the Ferrari SP12 EC, a one-of-a-kind supercar commissioned directly through Ferrari's exclusive Special Projects division. Inspired by the classic Ferrari 512BB that Clapton admired in the 1970s, the custom-built vehicle reportedly cost around $4.7 million and exists nowhere else in the world. Rather than chasing attention with dozens of exotic cars, Clapton chose to create one deeply personal automobile that reflected both his passion for engineering and his lifelong appreciation for Italian design. And when he wants complete privacy, the road is no longer enough. Clapton has also owned the 47-meter luxury yacht Va Bene, a floating retreat equipped with multiple guest suites, expansive entertainment areas, and every comfort expected from a modern superyacht. It represents something far more consistent with the man Clapton eventually became, a place to disappear, spend time with family, and enjoy the quiet life he spent decades searching for. Looking at Eric Clapton's estimated $450 million fortune today, it's easy to be impressed by the priceless paintings, luxury estates, custom Ferrari, or magnificent yacht. But in the end, those possessions aren't what define his life. What truly defines Eric Clapton is the journey behind them. A man who survived addiction, devastating loss, and years of personal heartbreak, yet found the strength to rebuild. Instead of allowing tragedy to have the final word, he chose to embrace family, protect his sobriety, continue making music, and dedicate part of his life to helping others through the Crossroads Center. Perhaps that is the greatest legacy he will ever leave behind. Now we'd love to hear from you. What part of Eric Clapton's life story moved you the most? Was it the heartbreaking tragedies he endured, the incredible fortune he built, or the peaceful life he finally found after so many years? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story from the lives of music's greatest legends. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.